Yeah. So, Nari, you are a counselor, right? And so, good. Jineng about that. Oh, Nari, you're a counselor. Um,
Mhm,
and then, because, the law, right? They know that, oh, the counselor, ni kha hulu yarachi, ni, oh, ni bao da nang ta, ni bao kia nang, ni bao, la ta ta lu nyu xia ba lu, right? And so, then 头个 when you discover that they have autism and you have those set of challenges, and then ก็ you'll share or explain your struggles with your family, or just the Hmong community at large. And you said you're in Wisconsin, right? So it's a big Hmong
mm,
population. So you're not that isolated from the Hmong community. Although I will say, even if you live within the Hmong community, you still can feel isolated, right? And especially
mhm.
on top of that, when you have a child with a disability, right? It can feel very isolating when you look community chi tao hay tia autism da yara chi. So even as a counselor, right, being recognized by your community or your family as someone who is talented and has the knowledge to understand what you're possibly going through, did you still feel like there were some challenges or barriers in the Hmong community, where even using all your skill set, you're just like, I just can't explain it in a way that can help you to understand what autism is and how we can move this conversation, because so see, 7 years ago, right? So about a decade ago, I would say that I hope that there has been a shift in the Hmong perspective on developmental disability, and in these last few years, hopefully, we're with all of us together trying to have more of these conversations about autism, to normalize these conversations. Hopefully, the conversations, I know they're not shifting right away, and I don't expect that, but I hope that there's at least like, um, the ones impacted by it are willing to share their stories. And I mean, I'm hello, right? I don't know, I've got like 20 episodes, so at least 20 different Hmong individuals are willing to share their stories and shift the tides. But again, as someone who, with the privilege of having the big words, right? The big strategies and everything. And did you still feel like you were hitting some walls when you were trying to explain or just teach or shed light on your children's struggles with even family members or anyone that you encountered?
Yeah, I've definitely, and I still feel like I'm still going through kind of like the waves of just like struggling to find like the right words to describe my children's needs and their
Hmm.
behaviors. And um, my husband and I, we've had to kind of like restructure our social lifestyle, right? We've kind of have to structure our lifestyle around our kids' needs. So with that, it's either we decide we're not gonna go to a social functioning or an event. It's really stressful when we take the whole family out and then one of my child has a breakdown or a meltdown. Um, and it's just stressful for him. It's stressful for us. He doesn't have a
Hmm.
way of communicating with us. He's non-speaking. So we've had to really implement, modifying kind of like our lifestyle to kind of meet the needs of where our kids are at right now,
Hmm.
especially with my youngest. So I would say that I do still struggle a lot with just kind of like defining and describing autism in home. That's kind of been where my struggle is. Just kind of explaining to even my parents, about
Hmm.
like, oh, and
Hmm.
then they do understand, and it's obvious, that he has a lot of needs, I think that they also struggle to just kind of like be able to identify and be able to help support me because they've never had to do it themselves, right? Because
Hmm.
um none of us has experience just having a child with special needs, and so they're also going through this their first time around as well, with like
Right.
being a grandparent with special needs grandchildren. So, um, having to have those conversations, it's more of like when we talk about this, it's more of like, um, "Ồ, chị cho được bài từ trong tài khoản trả chị cho được bài chị nữ nhân share thì trả được đó từ nữ vấn đề chị nữ nữ chỉ trong nhỏ nè nữ nữ
Mhm.
nhân share nè." And then, having to explain that, sometimes we have to exit early, sometimes we have
Yeah.
to go home early because, it's just overly stimulating to the point where it's so stressful where we have to make an early exit, and a lot of times that's kind of what happens, but in terms of like explaining everything in autism, I don't think that I'm there yet. I feel like that's still something that I'm working on, which is kind of having those conversations um, openly when someone asks me or when someone wants to know more about autism. Um, I don't think that I have had like a lot of like older um, generations, like, come up to me and talk to me. There have been, like, more of, like, onlookers, who's, like,
Mm.
kinda curious, right?
Mhm.
Or maybe once in a while, you might hear, like, someone ask a question like, "Oh, ôi, cha nữa chứ hay luôn đâu," like,
Mhm.
or, "What's wrong with him?"
Mhm.
Like, a lot of, like, who, what, why, and kinda wanting to know kinda, like, the backstory or, you know, um and then when you open that, like, gate, then it's like you're opening another like floodgate for like other questions of like, oh, is it genetic? Did they get it from
Mhm.
your side of the family? Is anyone in your husband's side of the family have it too?
Mhm.
And then it just kind of like a snowball effect, right? Where it no longer becomes like a very productive educational conversation, where it becomes now like more of like, okay, now you're really prying into my personal life, where
Mhm.
I don't know either, right? I don't
Right.
know where the, kind of like the etiology is what we call it, like what is the how did this happen, right?
Right.
Um,
I
yeah,
always
so
saw it
that's
as
my
like
experience. Mhm.
I'm sorry, I was just
Oh, no.
thinking whenever not your right? I always felt like it was like they're asking these questions because they want to be able to assign blame. Like what caused it? Who caused it? What did you do that caused it? And I run the Otao Hmong individuals, family and friends group, and we get a lot of questions, a lot of anonymous questions, and some of them are to me, I'm just shocked that in this 2024, with all the technology and information out there, and of course, but they were talking about the Hmong community, so it's a little different. Someone was like, kung mama ko ni thia ko ta hai tia ya vi ko mo C-section e ko atam ya thini mo autism lit or someone hai tia oh because ko inyo lao to ko mo ko mi thini mo C-section like or thini mo autism lit and to John the people who are assigning that blame or who is making these big declarations they say it's so like
Yeah.
that's it. Like I figured it out for you. This is why.
Mhm,
And yet you're
mhm.
back here going, no research backs this up, if you're into the research or nobody else is saying this. But then, yeah, go Haina. When you code switch and you put your mom hat back on, you're like, I don't know. Like they wouldn't mislead me. They wouldn't misinform me. And then you do question what's going on, right? And then that again, another rabbit hole. So it is hard, y'all. Like whether you even a like I said, who has the vocabulary, who has the, all the strategies to talk about how to overcome all of these feelings of doubt. Like you still feel it. You still feel kind of like, I don't know, like how do I explain this to you without just feeling like I can't? And I think that's where the conversations that I've been having is that people are just like, I can't anymore, right? And so it gets to a point where you're just like, I'm just in survival mode. We talk about survival mode. Our parents' generation. Would you say that with your parents, being a parent of Autamitu with autism, varying ends of the spectrum, would you say that sometimes you feel like you're in survival mode?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because every day, I mean, it's like you never really know what's gonna happen, right?
Mhm.
And so sometimes you just kind of have to kind of go along with what's gonna happen. Can't really plan ahead, you know? I mean, you can have all the tools in the toolbox, but sometimes like life kind of puts you in a place where you're just kind of like, oh, I've never been here before. I've never done
Mm.
this before, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm going through right now
Yeah.
with my youngest, right? With my 3-year-old.
Mm.
Because when I first when we first got him diagnosed, you know, was because he definitely presented very much different than his older brother, you
Okay.
know, but I knew immediately right away that he's definitely on the spectrum,
Mhm.
because he never looked at you in the eye, he never responded to his name, he was stimming a lot, and he always had like an averted gaze.
Mhm.
So he was definitely doing a lot of things like, you know, if you look up like autism, he was doing all those things, right?
Yeah.
And so I knew immediately, like, okay, he's definitely on the spectrum, you know, and we need to get him evaluated because I want to get him started with services as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, how
which
old was
that's
he
exactly what he was.
when you first suspected?
He was one, like a
1.
little bit
Okay.
over. Yeah, because
Yeah.
when he when he was just like a newborn, I think he's never been like a very healthy baby, I guess.
Mhm.
He was always very sick. So he went what was it? Yeah, when he was born, he was cooing a lot, right? It's
Mhm.
like nito po pao tama, Gina, right? Like
Okay.
maybe the first 3, 4 months, like it's like do like it just seems like he was a little bit more mature and like you talk to him, and he's like cooing at you. It's like he's looking at
Mhm.
you, and then like a few months after that, it just seemed like that kind of like fall off, you know, where
Mhm.
he digressed, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and that was really worrisome for
Yeah.
me. And then, you know, as he started to turn 1, you would try to talk to him, you would call his name, he wouldn't
Mhm.
respond to you, he wouldn't look at you.
Mhm.
Um, so that was when we got him evaluated then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But
Nari,
we
for
uh,
y'all, Hmong listeners, I
mhm,
think this is the part where, yeah, ni ko haina,
mhm.
uh,
Oh, sure. Mhm,
the little things it could mention though, maybe they can Hmong mothers or fathers like, oh, that's a condition. Just how that she can you get the high do ya, in Hmong, the the giúp bị cái bỏ it would get say it got that oh you to try your own each like good bỏ mean you to shy over the next few months change but increase this behavior or you can kind of yeah to new be phát triển你的你个还有的你大家还有这个的是个也个系呢maybe 同你做你搞你这里只只就个了 yeah so
mhm,
can you tell me again what were those behaviors that you were looking for or that you saw that kind of like uh alerted you to continue watching
mhm. Yeah, so thằng nữ mô li bé là lâu lì về thằng đời chỉ ní trong li nữ bóc bóc ta chỉ hai lũ trên nữ chỉ trong còn nữ yên cheอยู่thêm tính ní bao lúa nè ya nữ bao
hmm
lúa thế ya li nữ tư hai lũ tớiอยู่thế nào đó
hmm
chỉ cho li cỏ li một trâu cỏ bé li trong còn nữ như bóc ta rồi chỉ thằng đời chỉ trong cònอยู่hai lũ trên nữ thiaอยู่luôn chỉ trong nữอยู่ở chỉ trong nữ chỉ trong còn nữ chỉ tếอยู่nữa
hmm
mình chỉ tếอยู่thế nữ trong nên nữ tức chỉ hai lũ ý là li thầu nữ có một bé li bao li nè nè
hmm
về thằng đó chị tôi biết sao cái ôn trả chị nữ ho trong đi nữ tôi tiếng lâu cái này về thằng đó của tôi biết sao chị tôi là một thả ra nữ tôi à này mạo hay của tôi trong cầu lo lùi digress hay đi nhà này
regress
dạ li hả
regress
哈
你包打的是用的
哈
你这里煮，你这里真正直的，in fact，你大家
哈
呀，
đặc á dạ
Mhm.
Thì, dạ chị của Duyên mùa hay dạ cho cái kiến nhớ sẽ cho từ này mẫu chị luôn lên tới li thì sẽ thì ok um, khu đã khảo nị đó chị
Mhm.
của Duyên báo ấy của Duyên báo khu ấy đã khảo nị ấy của Duyên báo đã khỏi của tụ lo chị nữ tư ấy nhỏ học birthday before này chị
Mhm.
của Duyên báo tiệc từ number tư của khu chị nhưng chỉ từ tín hình đợi là mấy tuổi chứ đã chị tôi thảo
Mhm.
rồi với một cái nhớ sẽ chị um, có xã ni bá chị đâu có tụi mình nhỏ
Mhm.
chị là một lý tôi báอยู่คนเดียวchị là một lý
Yeah.
xã lý từ speech therapist ya itu occupational therapist nó
Mhm.
chị nhóm tựอยู่sẽอยู่một cái nhớ sẽ bị lý trả lời chị là bá
Yeah.
อยู่คนเดียว
thế cái the thọ có hai đứa lên bên ni chỉ tin chắc có yeah thế cái
Mhm,
the like averted gaze right like
mhm,
ni ni tu yo có tu so ni yo tu ti pe
mhm,
so ni ở tu ti lo cái ô xin mà đi chơi ngân kia mà đi chơi ni chỉ chưa hết tiền cái nhóm đấy ya ni chỉ chưa hết
mhm,
tiền mua cái nhóm đấy or even cái gì ni nhớ bao lâu là ni dùng cái ni nhớ hơn ni yêu ni ilang yeah knew that averted gaze, like, did you recognize that there more anybody else in the world?
mhm,
Yeah, you could do maybe ni marinja tajin mu
mhm,
so was that like that averted gaze? Was that something that you saw a lot of that kind of like
yes,
alerted
yes,
you like, oh
yeah,
man, it's not just
yeah,
being independent and being so
uh-huh,
mature, there's something else going on. Yeah.
yeah, người nhà Olin đã có thế người nhà cây nữa lúc ta hầu nữa
Mm-hmm.
người nhà cây nữa lúc ta ta hầu thì người nhà bố tê nữa đi trong xe thằng bố tê rồi đi bố tê nữa ta xin bố tê đâu
Mm-hmm.
đó nhiều chị ý là đi mình cả hay đợi chị normal nè bây giờ chị yêu
Mm-hmm.
yêu sai thì ok ta cho người đi cái bá chị
Mm-hmm.
beach bá bá người
Yeah.
yeah
I think for young teenage people, the signs of autism, like bảo từ nhỏ bé bé, right, ít không, that's a baby. That's in like the, thằng đấy ni biết sai thì ni cô, ni yung ít nhất giờ mình chỉ ni cho nó, thế chỉ biết sai thì ni chịu, chắc cái mẹ á sư, right? So it's so important that for me, they explain in my that only not, only it can sound so insignificant. Có ý, biết ơi, nếu bên này chỉ tí là, tới giờ tí chẳng phong như thế thì, okay, chỉ tí là cái lẽ. But it's like, no, like, you young, you follow the signs, you, bỏ lên that you go in your tight, yeah. Đó khó, even nếu nào cô, hopefully, I'm doing a re-auth, and the mình nhỏ lên ni, blog and a goal is turning to hearing his name. Reminding that yes, this is a very simple goal. You might think that your son should know this goal already, but why are we continuing to work on it? Because it's a safety reason, y'all. Đó khó giống mua ý chẳng được tự được giống nó các cái nữa về energy based train theo work cần bảo vệ thọ lúc tích cái lúc bây giờ chủ tiền lần chia sẽ lúc tích cái lúc về đó họ energy bảo lên đấy nó energy đi mua lại lúc phải muốn lừa or something right God forbid anything happen and it's a basic life skill but it starts when they're very little y'all yeah go ahead 12 13 months yeah they lose it so early on and then we keep having
yeah
to work on that and it becomes a safety issue to the loving G, right? So, I mean, I could go on and on about all the different things that you need to look out for when they're little. And you were talking about learning all the different um, chapters of, our kiddos' lives and kind of going along that journey. And one of them that got high was, your 12-year-old. He's a tween, right? My son asked me the other day, he said, Mommy, what's a tween? I tell him, I was like, I think it's that age, right before you turn 13. But, you're in a very interesting journey in like mo ito kaol siyang, ito pa siyang. So it's kind of a longer stretch of experiences.
yeah
But as go consult with your parents any kind of, we're talking about the blockchain, you know, but I have to remind them, you know, cái từ mìa yêu yên yếu lo, nếu yên yếu lo lo, nếu yên yếu chỉ yêu blockchain forever. Next year, new kindergarten, and then really next year, I think middle school. Next year, I think high school. So, you know, I would say, be your mom, be, you know, Nareen, you and I know that growing up, being a titsy, like, for beta, neurotypical, right?
Mhm.
Neurotypical, um, individuals, even being a titsy, that she talked a bit about puberty, about hormones. We had to kind of learn that on our own.
Yep.
And you know, you learn it in like maybe sex ed because that was a required thing in middle school. But then, you know, you bring up a very valid point that, you know, like, even though we're grown, how do you have a conversation with your child with a special need, or your child with autism about their own body, right? And so you had mentioned that's something that you're kind of like, you know, on the cusp of having to dive down that journey and you're not really sure how to navigate that, right? And so I just thank you so much for being so brave and bringing that to the forefront of these conversations because I think a lot of us want to talk about those safe topics. You know, let's talk about, you know, labeling and talking and, you know, all these things, using the bathroom. But honestly, like, I'm just so glad that you brought it up that, you know, puberty and hormones is a real thing. And I think even for Gudelmika clients, lần này thiết gì lấy hiện tại thì, just because the more developmental disability, you know, go through puberty, and it's like when it happens, it hits them like a freight train because they're like, oh my gosh, you know, like hormones are coursing through their bodies just like
Yeah.
all of us, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then cái too, but in China, they're like,
Yeah.
inutuchi ninyo kopo shihona last year, this
Mhm.
year, nicha kanya,
Mhm.
what are we gonna do? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so these conversations, maybe parents think so, but yeah, but Hannah, you're living in on survivor mode. You're just trying to get through today. You're not thinking about how you're going to guide them through puberty. So tell
Yeah.
me, what are some things that you have encountered that you're like, oh my gosh, are there? Who do I talk to about this? Are there resources available? Like, what do we do? How do we talk to him in a way that makes sense, right? That
Mhm.
is appropriate, first of all, age appropriate, but also makes sense for his very unique neurodivergent brain, right? Like, so what are some things that you have found?
Yeah. So actually a year ago, I think 5th grade is the year, between 5th grade and 6th grade is when they actually like teach you,
Yeah.
like puberty and how that looks like, right?
Mhm.
And the special education teacher at that time actually reached out to me, just to kind of inform me, let me know that, hey, this is the topic that we're going to be talking about. Do you have any concerns? Would you prefer us not to have that conversation with him? And would you just want to add that piece at home? What are your thoughts? Right. So I said, yes, go ahead, have that
Mhm.
conversation with him at school. However, I want to, I want to make sure that he's instructed to understand that he can't just bring that knowledge home and share with his 8-year-old brother, right?
Mhm.
So his 8-year-old brother is in that like very curious stage
Yeah.
too, so their cognitive and developmental is so different, right?
Yeah.
And so they actually work with him on some social stories and just
Mhm.
understanding like healthy boundaries,
Yeah.
and healthy bodies, as well as like, I think they had like done like an activity like, do I think it or do I say it? Right.
Okay. Yep.
And kind of going through like different scenarios of like, do I say this to my friend or
Mhm.
do I say this to my teacher or do I keep it? Do I just think it? Right. Or is it something
Mhm.
that I should just not say at all? So those are kind of like some of the things that they did with him
Yeah.
at school. And then at home, we've just been talking about like personal hygiene, right? Making sure that, hey, your body is changing. You're not a small boy anymore, and you're, you're probably going to smell more because you're boy, and you have to take care of yourself by showering, brushing your
Mhm.
teeth, changing your clothes, putting your clothes in the the dirty laundry bag, so he's been able to kind of keep up with some of those routine. Um, we haven't gotten to the point of talking specifically about like, hey, my body parts, including my penis, is also growing too, and
Mhm.
like how to teach that, and also
Mhm.
talking more about like, hey, there's going to be hairs growing in other parts of your body,
Mhm.
like on your arms, maybe your legs, maybe um, your face, maybe your
Mhm.
chest, maybe your
Yeah.
pubic, or private area. Like we haven't gotten to that part of
Mhm.
having those conversations yet. I just wanted to kind of like have those conversations separate from his siblings so that
Mm.
he can have more of that like one-on-one.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the extent. And I bring it up now because um, he has been curious, and
Mhm.
because he has access to using the computer,
Yeah.
he I don't really know what he's looking or if he accidentally clicks on things when he's playing video games or on
Mhm.
YouTube, because sometimes some of those ad pops up, right?
Yeah.
And he may have like clicked on something that leads him to something that he's curious about.
Mhm.
So there's been like an incident or two where my 8-year-old's like, "Mom, looking at, um uh private parts or something like
Mhm.
that." And I'm like, "What's going on?" And so I had a conversation with my oldest about like, "Hey, what's going on?" And he's like, "I was just curious." I'm
Mhm.
like, "Okay, let's sit down and have a conversation about this, because um it's okay for you to be curious, because I needed to make sure that he wasn't going to feel embarrassed or feel
Mhm.
ashamed, but I wanted to know that it's okay for you to be curious, and if
Yeah.
you're curious, I also want you to come to mom or dad to talk
Mhm.
about that and ask questions about these things, because the internet is not a safe place to look at those things, right?"
Yep.
And so that's kind of the extent of where we are at with just starting this kind of new phase
Mhm.
of where we're at. And so that's why I brought up this topic, is because I haven't found really anything to help me really navigate through it. A lot of
Yeah.
my girlfriends have girls.
Yeah.
So, um, because they have girls, then their experience is very much different from my experience with my son. So I needed someone who can relate, or maybe who can kind of shed some insight into resources or ways that I can use certain languages, or certain terminology to
Mhm.
have that conversation with him, so he can kind of, so that it can stick to him, so he can be
Yeah.
like, "Oh yeah, like I feel proud of my new body, or that my body is changing," or something like that, right? Where it's not like body shaming, or it's not like making you feel embarrassed.
For
So
sure. I mean,
yeah.
everything has to be individualized, y'all. So because I don't know, like, just his repertoire, or, anything really about him. So I would imagine, just based on what you share, that he is, you know, um, cognitively able to understand and very curious and able to communicate that. And so the way that you would respond to him would definitely, you might still use social stories, but maybe like, um, more complex ways of explaining that. But then here's the thing too, is that for parents of kiddos who maybe are not as aware, but they're still going through puberty, they're still very curious, right? But they just can't explain, or nor can you, have that back and forth conversation about, it's okay, right? I just want to protect you from the internet, because the internet is a it can be, like you said, unsafe place for our kiddos, and they can get preyed on easily. But I would say, I think, and I shared with you earlier. So, in the ABA world, in the last like 2 or 3 years, maybe even 5 years, there's this new SIG, so special interest group, called Sex ABA that's opened up, and they're taking all of the different science that we use in ABA and applying it towards teaching, and not just parents, but like individuals, who have autism, about how to navigate your body, puberty, relationships, and I mean, it's so much more, but it's just making sure that we're being very careful and very intentional with the information that we're sharing, because we also don't want any of them to get the wrong message and, you know, inadvertently getting hurt, right? And so making sure that we're sharing that science. And so anytime any parents ask me, I'm like, I want to redirect you to a sex EBA certified person who does this and is really working on this. But I just want to share this example of how, really um, catching it early on when your child's starting to exhibit that curiosity, like, yan ni chỉ bảo hay tia, cũng nhà luôn cao, đó chỉ cũng chỉ bảo, like, lúc kế cái của the cũng nhà ni, đó chỉ cũng chỉ bảo, how to communicate that. Um,
Mhm.
we want to teach our sons that, because one of the characteristics of autism can be not being able to read social cues, right? Yeah, let you buy there.
Mhm.
Yeah, good. Yeah, the longer that she needs to go, needs to tara go. She good in your kuchi ke go you mutanu go
Yeah.
you mu, and maybe go you mu gonu, right? Like gunyan.
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna be really, really just
Right.
transparent. Gunyan nu batu go you mu gonu batu do gunya, right? But oh my gosh, you can't do that. So how do we
Yep.
teach our bikimito? Depending on where they're
Yes.
at, you can't do
Yeah.
that. That can
Mhm.
be illegal, unsafe, depending on age. Like we have to have those real conversations. And so I will just share just anecdotally, go a teenager, right? And so again, we have to remember the big even though the more autism, you said that, oh, did you bother G, right? The home perception is did you bother G, um I'm not even going to use the words that you typically would hear about just kind of like undermining and really not appreciating the fact that they have human needs and desires too.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
so like you have to recognize that first of all. So từ của từ client của Holly đó nên nhớ me on side, right? Like he's very attracted to the opposite sex. He had a type. He liked like blonde hair, blue eyed, dotty, the very skinny girls. So whenever Nicole program job like to go grocery shopping, and that was a program that we were teaching to teach independent living skills. Umutata the grocery store, but it no longer a fit type. The first thing is that, oh yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh, what if no no if ito a then first of all, ito young girl with a father who does not understand autism. What's gonna happen to my client and me, right? We're gonna get beat up. And then, or what if, ito ito no, and they don't understand autism? We're still gonna get beat up. Someone's gonna be upset today. So we had to, we couldn't just like, protect him from that, right? We have to teach him how to, through use of social stories, like when you see a pretty girl, right? We're very specific. Like when we go, I mean, like the thing with what I do is that we're so specific, almost to a fault. When we go to the grocery store and you see a pretty girl, do not go close to her. If you still want to say hi, you can wave. Do not yell
Mhm.
at her, because get their attention. So we have to address everything, right? Every little thing to make sure to protect him, really, right? To make sure that his rights are being protected, and also he's bodily is being bodily protected, that no harm comes to him. But that's how like descriptive we would get, Naree. Like really like identifying what are the challenges, what are the barriers, how can we help him to learn that it's like you said, it's okay to be attracted. It's okay to
Mhm.
have desires. It's okay to feel like I don't know what my body is doing to me, but I'm just really attracted to this person. But I as the guardians, as the professionals helping him guide them through puberty and all these things that can potentially be dangerous in if
Yeah.
we encounter certain individuals who don't understand autism, who don't accept that this is a real thing that he just does not understand.
Right.
It's not okay,
Yeah.
right? So we talk. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm going kind of an offshoot of this topic, but it's just like maybe but it's very real. It's very real that,
The
but
reality.
we have to address it in a very real way, and in a way that keeps at the same time protecting their dignity too, yeah, and not allowing them to be scapegoated. Like, oh, yeah,
Or getting in trouble.
you know what I mean? Like we just have to protect them at all times, but at the same time allowing them to also experience life as well, experience those desires of being a human being. And so like I think it's great that you're kind of addressing this head on early on and just making sure that Gato knows that you and your husband are a safe place to talk about this and shame him and look right because I mean you guys should be the first place that he goes to, so kudos to you guys for really acknowledging it and not just pushing to the wayside like, oh no he won't, right? Like he won't know what that's like. He won't need to know. It'll just happen and we'll just be fine. We'll never talk about it because yeah, kinda.
Yeah,
That's the
and that's
Hmong
what my
way, right?
parents do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's the Hmong way. Like we just don't talk about it. It's just we just
Yeah.
and it's just like and then I mean, it's okay to have these conversations and maybe some people think, oh, autism no, even you and maybe even if they're nonverbal, you still should treat that
Mhm.
conversation as you would your verbal child. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Even right, and you're so right on that because my 3-year-old giờ ní chỉ hay luôn á, like ní trong cả không lo cho you nhá
Yeah.
ý là lên ní chơi lo tuổi you tê giá you move cho khỏi ní đi you
Mhm.
bán nữa na, right? So that
Mhm.
in terms is already him like communicating with us, right?
Yeah.
But when he does that, I'm using languages, I'm
Right.
verbally saying out loud, like I would say, "Oh, I want cereal," if he's pointing at a box of cereal or something like
Mhm.
that, because I know that that's what he wants, right? So I would have to kind of like be the person
Yeah.
to use the voice for him, and that so at some point, at one day, he's gonna pick up on it, then
Mhm.
he can just pair it, and hopefully he will start learning how to do it himself, right?
Mhm.
Instead of like having mom or dad use those languages for him. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that's important to have the conversations about puberty, especially with him now being a middle schooler as well. And it's such a big environment, I remember being in middle school and it just feels like such a big world, right? When you go into middle school versus like when you're in elementary school,
Mhm.
where it still feels a little bit more intimate, because you're small, so it just feels like it's such a small of a world. But when you go into like middle school and high school, it's such a it feels like it's such a big world, in those type of settings where there's so many different types of people that you're encountering with, so many different like dynamic going on that it's
Mhm.
hard to fit in, right? And
Yeah.
so having that conversation to help him boost his self-esteem and his confidence where he's not gonna get made fun of, right? And if he
Mhm.
did get made fun of, like what can he do to kind of navigate those type of situations at school so that he doesn't come home and feel bad about himself, right? So that's one of my biggest like goal is just kind of like help him learn how to like understand, this stage that he's going through so that he can kind of navigate through it with his peers or with his friends.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of resources out there. I'm happy to share any of them with you or anyone who is curious to know. And I mean, sometimes too, I'm sure as a parent of a tween, sometimes it's like I just can't communicate this. I'm communicating the best way I know how, but it's just not going through. And sometimes those social stories are very helpful. But I like to share that with social stories. You just want to make sure they're very individualized and specific to him, right, and where he is at, meeting him where he's at that. So I encourage parents to, sometimes you have to be the one to write it. Or, if you have a service provider, someone in, if you have an analyst, enlist their help, like, hey, we're going through this and we're just not sure. We're at a loss for words for how to explain this. Cause I think even as well informed as we are and aware as we are, sometimes it's hard when it's your own child. Yeah. You're like, I don't know. How do I say this without me feeling weird about it? Like, I feel like for me,
Yeah.
even today, I was like, um, he hears me again trying to just be very honest. Like, I'm like, I literally had this conversation today with a parent. I said, well, I mean, it was with a mom. I said, well, I'm a mom, you're a mom, but I'm not really sure how to teach our boys how to go to the bathroom because I don't know. I've never used the bathroom as a boy. I don't know. Like, do you wipe
Yeah.
after you pee, or do you just, I don't know what you do. So it's very interesting for me when I'm writing these goals. I'm like, oh gosh, what if I'm teaching them wrong because I've never done it myself, right? So,
Yeah.
always realizing, recognizing like your own shortcomings and going, okay, who could write this well, right? Who can help me write this? Because I want to make sure that I get this right the first time around. Because they trust us so much to know all the things,
Yeah.
and sometimes when Bichipana, we have to recognize that ourselves and go seek help from someone who can help support and guide us, so that we are not blindly leading our kids, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Well, Nari, thank you so much for making time to chat with me today. It was so just enlightening to know that uh, in this technology crazy age that we live in, that we want to make sure that all big and home families, they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel like they don't have to um, have these unrealistic expectations to aspire to, because that's what everyone else is showing on social media, knowing that if you're struggling, it's a whole thing, and it's a process, and it's a journey. And that's why, ever since a few years ago when we started this, I call it a journey, because depending on when you're at in your journey, you're either ready to hear certain things or you're not. And if you're not quite ready, just want you to keep in mind that, there are others who have on they look, right? And whether or not they're sharing their journey, like, you're never alone. And I just hope that, because these stories, your story today, will resonate with families who maybe they have a tween, right? Or your parents, maybe more, more than one child on the spectrum, to know that, maybe they felt ill equipped to deal with the diagnosis that were given to their child, feeling like they didn't have the answers, right? But to know that none of us have the answers, and then you only realize it when it's all you, yeah, you know. Um, just like you said earlier, and thank you so much too. I of course. Appreciate everything that you have to share, but really appreciate what you said about how, just the vulnerability that come with you sharing that after working in the field with your and you just, this is just like, real life. You said, was this the world saying, hey, here you go? Like, and I just want to tell you, sister, that I don't think that the world is like that. And I think that's
Right.
the mystery of autism too, y'all. Being ball. And
Right.
so, being more young, yeah, yeah, really no. The truth is that even scientists don't know. Even scientists who are currently studying this, let's autism, right?
Mhm.
So, the thing that we do know is that there's support. There are other home brothers and sisters out there who are going through very similar journeys, and just talking about it, hopefully someone hears this, they feel less alone, and they go give listeners a maybe because that's all. Maybe everyone's okay and it's just me. And the truth is that everyone's going through something, and hopefully this will encourage you to share your story, and yeah, you teach lula, know that even in the field we're being all the time,
Mhm.
even being teach I think as long as we continue to connect, and just share the stories. I think that in itself will hopefully help others to heal as they're going through their stages, and being intentional with how they proceed with their days. So thank you for being so inspiring and all your tips for self-care. Those were so great because I'm like, for myself, I'm like, thank you for validating that sitting in the garage for a few minutes is okay. Because sometimes I feel really bad. I'm like,
Yeah,
I should go in, but I'm not really ready. So you guys, if you heard this, Nari is giving us permission to do that. That's totally, a-okay. We all deserve a little bit of time to just decompress in the car before you come
agreed.
in. It's very important to take time for yourself. So thank you so much for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Tia.